Hey everybody out there. Been working out by the lake the last few days and just noticing how low the lake is. And I like it. I think it's good for the lake and everything, but I think it'll bring into effect an old school technique that we used to catch a lot of big fish on back in the day when the lake would stay down low. And the reason it works so well when the lake gets low is down on the lower end of the lake, there's lots and lots of standing timber. So old big cedar thickets and hillsides that were covered with timber. All the creek arms down there on the lower ends of all these highland reservoirs have lots of deep standing timber in them. And so I grew up, we loved to fish down on the end of the lake in that clear water around them old cedar trees and pole trees. And what we would do is we would throw a spinnerbait along beside those deep trees. And if you could find isolated cedar tree amongst a bunch of pole trees, or a cedar tree that stuck out a little further than the rest of the cedar trees, just whatever was a little different. So if you could find a cedar tree that was leaning a little bit amongst a bunch of straight standing up ones, or an old hardwood tree amongst a bunch of cedar trees, you could catch some big bass off of those isolated spots throwing a big spinnerbait. So we caught a lot of fish on a jerkbait. You get a lot more numbers on a jerkbait fishing around those trees like that. But if you want to catch a big one, we'd take a 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce big willow leaf spinnerbait with something like a 6 or 7 willow leaf. We always use the Colorado willow leaf combination so that bait wouldn't lift too much. And what we do is we just throw it past that tree and reel it slow right beside it. We weren't fishing on the bottom. A lot of these trees were in 20, 30, 40 feet of water. We were wanting to target the fish that were suspended in those trees. It was a great bait for catching those big bass. Like I said, not a lot of numbers. So we'd use a 1/2 ounce white chartreuse, solid white chartreuse and blue, just a standard willow leaf spinnerbait. Back then, willow leaf was brand new. Back in the early mid 80s, a big willow leaf was something that had just came out. So it was super popular. And boy, we caught a lot of big bass throwing a willow leaf spinnerbait beside those trees. All these highland reservoirs around the region have that timber. And when the lake level is low like they are now, you can see those trees. You can see where the end tree on a point is. You can see that isolated one out by itself. Or if you just see one all by itself out in the middle of nowhere, you better stop and make a couple casts around that thing. The kind of equipment we use, just heavy line, 17, 20-pound test on a good heavy bait caster, because you're going to need something. Normally where there's one tree, there's more, that you could get that big bass out of there. There were some guys on the lake that were extremely good with this technique. They'd go fish for 5 or 6 bites a day. They'd have an 8-pounder and a giant limit of bass to go with it, and put the whoop on you. Just slow rolling spinnerbait in them trees. So if you get out a little bit, here come this next month. February was prime time for that, and early March. After that, would have to kind of fade away. But this February into March, you get out there right now and start looking for some of that, I assure you, you might just catch the bass of your life around one of them old trees.